Hey guys, Will here. So Ascher Racing have been my benchmark when it comes to the highest quality sim racing wheels for a number of years now. We've got their brand new F64 wheel in the studio as well as their new dash. So today we're going to be checking these out, comparing them to some common alternatives as well, and finding out whether this is the wheel and dash for you. Let's get started. Okay guys, so we've got a lot to get through today, but I want to start this off by giving you a bit of information just to make sure you got the full context of exactly what we're doing today. So firstly, a big thank you to Ascher Racing for sending across the wheel and the dash for us to check out today. Now, as I touched on in the intro, we will be comparing these products to a lot of alternatives in today's video as well. So it's important that you know that all of those products were all sent to us under the exact same conditions here. So without rambling on forever, what it boils down to is there's no third party has any sort of creative control over anything that we're sharing in today's video or any of our other review videos for that matter. They don't get to see the videos before they go live, and everything that we're going to be talking about in today's video is my own observations and opinions. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the products that you see in today's video, there will be some links down in the description below. Those are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you. So we really do appreciate your support there. That's what keeps us running and doing what we do. But let's get stuck into the wheel and dash now, starting with a little bit of pricing information. So let's start off with the dash, because that's a little bit more simple to explain in terms of pricing. There's two variants available with this guy. There's the 5-inch version, as you see here, and also a smaller 4-inch variant. The 4-inch comes in at €369. That includes 19% tax. And then the 5-inch version, which we have here, comes in at €429, including, once again, 19% tax. So just make sure that you are looking around for local resellers. There are quite a few of them. Again, we will put some links to some of our affiliate partners down in the description below for you. But taxes, import duties, and shipping costs will, of course, vary depending on where you are in the world. So make sure you shop around for the best possible deal. Then when we look at the wheel, this is available also in two variants, the SimuCube wireless version, as we see here, and the USB version. We'll talk about the difference between those two variants in more detail as we get on through today's video. Both of those are the same price. That is €1,099, including, once again, that 19% tax. So to give you a bit of context around the price of this wheel and what we're comparing it to today, again, depending on where you're located and the shipping and taxes involved in getting a wheel to you, you're looking at around the same kind of ballpark price as something like a VRS Direct Force Pro wheel. We're going to be looking at that on the channel very soon as well. The Grid MPX wheel, again, we're also going to be checking that out very soon too, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on these reviews. And the Cube Controls F Pro, which we have actually already reviewed here on the channel, I'll put a link down in the description below for you guys, also comes in roughly around the same kind of ballpark price as well. So all of these wheels vary in terms of some of the features and benefits that they offer. What really stands out about this particular wheel is just the sheer number of inputs that you actually have available to you. So we'll of course be unpacking that in all its detail very shortly, but before we get into that, first thing that I wanted to address was some structural changes that have taken place at Ascher Racing, which I think it's important that you guys are aware of. So back when we reviewed the original F28 SC, which was one of the first, in fact, the first wheel that I had for my SimuCube 2 Ultimate. This is actually serial number 001, so this was the very first wheel they made in their very first production run. Back then, they were doing everything themselves by hand in-house, and therefore the attention to detail, the quality was extremely high. And that was one of the reasons why Ascher Racing became one of my benchmarks for quality. Now, in the time since then, they've actually transitioned across to partnering with a third-party company called KW Automotive. You might be familiar with them. They make some really high-end suspension kits for real-life cars. So that partnership has obviously allowed them to greatly increase their production capacity. But one of the risks in doing that is always that the level of attention to detail and the overall build quality can suffer. Now, when we looked at the F64 V3 wheel a little while ago, link down in the description below if you want to see that review, we were very impressed with the overall build quality. We didn't really see any significant changes in the approach to the design of the PCB, quality of the soldering, materials used, anything like that. And I was really happy to see that. The quality was every bit as good as it was back when they were hand making them themselves in their own factory. And I'm happy to see that things haven't slipped over time either. The build quality that we're looking at here is every bit as good as it was with the V2 wheel and every bit as good as the original F28 SC that we reviewed as well. So I just wanted to note that for you guys, because I know a few people were concerned about the changes that have been taking place behind the scenes, and I wanted to make sure that you guys were were aware of them. So as I mentioned earlier, there are two variants of this wheel available. They both look pretty much identical to each other from the front, and they both have the same overall feature set in terms of inputs. The difference being the USB version connects directly to your PC via USB and is compatible with any wheelbase. If you're using it with a Fanatec wheelbase, you will need to have either an emulator or a Fanatec official hub just to make sure that you enable force feedback on the wheelbase. But provided that you can mount the wheel via the 70mm stud pattern to whatever quick release you need for your particular wheelbase, that will be compatible with everything. Now the SC version is a Simucube specific wireless version using Simucube's own proprietary Bluetooth protocol. So the wireless version of these wheels will only be compatible with Simucube 2 bases or Simucube 1 if you have the upgraded Bluetooth module installed in the base itself. So just make sure that you're picking the appropriate wheel for your particular usage case, remembering again that they both do come in at the same price. So regardless of whether you're buying the USB or the wireless version, both are only compatible with PC, and that goes for the dash as well. That connects to your PC via USB and can be operated through common software like Joel Real Timing, Z1 Dashboard, or SimHub. And once again, that is only PC compatible. So we'll get into ergonomics in a lot more detail once we get up and running on the rig a little bit later on in today's video. But just to give you a really quick rundown here, you're looking at a 285mm diameter. So pretty much the perfect diameter, in my opinion, for a crossover between Formula style driving and GT3, GT4 style driving. Now, another important factor in how any wheel feels on your rig as well is the weight. So this weighs in at 1,140 grams without the quick release. That's the same apparently between the USB and the Simucube version. And just like what we've seen with every other Ascher Racing wheel that we've looked at over the years, absolutely no concerns in terms of build quality whatsoever. We'll look at the materials a little bit later on for you guys as well, but let's get into the inputs now, because there is an absolutely monstrous number of inputs on these wheels. Now, as the F64 name would suggest, you've got a total of 64 programmable inputs, but you can actually step that up to a lot more than that, as you'll see in just a minute. So we've got an array of 14 push buttons, and those are all positioned around the perimeter of the wheel, making them relatively easy to reach without taking your hands off the wheel or taking your eyes off the road. One thing you'll notice is there is a little shroud around this inner button here. That is to allow you to feel the difference in the position and make sure you're not pressing the wrong button by accident without taking your eyes off the road. Now, if we look at something like a Cube Controls F Pro, for example, you can see they've got into a lot more intricate detail in the plastic shrouds that they have around the buttons. Now, personally, I prefer, from an aesthetic point of view, the cleaner look that we have here on the Ascher Racing wheel. But one advantage that this wheel does have over the Ascher Racing wheel is if you are driving in VR, so you can't actually physically see the wheel, this does make it a little bit easier to memorize the feeling of the position of each button under your fingers. So particularly if you are wearing gloves in VR, that can be very, very useful. You know, with muscle memory and position, it's not too much of an issue. But if that is something that's important to you, then that would be potentially one reason that you might want to look at a Cube Controls wheel as opposed to something like this. But the buttons themselves, as we've always seen with Ascher Racing, have a very, very nice feel to them. Now, interestingly, in their marketing material, they refer to these buttons as having haptic feedback. And I wasn't sure whether there was some sort of an active system inside the wheel that gave you some sort of mechanical clunk or something like that when you push a button. But no, there doesn't appear to be anything like that. It's just referring to the sensation of actually clicking the button and getting that nice mechanical click. Now, one thing that I do really like about these buttons, and I'll try to get the wheel on an angle so you can see it a little bit better on camera, there is quite a nice amount of initial squish in the button before it actually mechanically activates, and it's not a really hollow sounding click either. So these are definitely among my personal favorite buttons that I've used on any sim racing wheel, and that's actually remained consistent even though an Ascher Racing wheel was the very first wheel I used with the Simucube base. Through the probably 40 or so wheels that we've tested, I still feel like these are among my favorite buttons. So again, if we compare to a Cube Controls wheel, these don't have that initial squish to them, so it's much more of a kind of just clicky in and out digital style button, I guess you could say. I wouldn't say that one is necessarily better than the other, it's just a little bit different. And just for the sake of completeness here, the VRS wheel, similar kind of feel. These don't have that initial squish to them, although they do tend to rattle around a little bit inside the frame, which you don't hear if you shake the wheel, but you can actually hear if I wiggle them around like so. But we'll talk about that when we get into the review of the VRS wheel at a later time. The buttons on the grip wheel have a slightly softer click to them, but a similar kind of action in that they also have a little bit of squish to them before they actually activate. But we'll talk about that in more detail in a later video as well. Now, one thing just to be aware of too, there isn't any sort of backlight or illumination on any of the buttons on this wheel, whereas with the Cube Controls F Pro and the Grid MPX wheel, you do have that functionality. So that may be a deal breaker for you. Now, for me personally, I'm not overly fussed about LED lighting on buttons. It's something that I find I can generally take or leave, although we are starting to see some really cool things being possible with those RGB LED backlights on buttons, having them react to button presses, show things like spotter, telemetry data, so there are starting to be some pretty creative things that you can do, and obviously none of that functionality is available on this particular wheel, so worth considering there. So moving on with the buttons now, we have two 7-way switches here, or funky switches as they're often referred to. So those can be pushed to the left, the right, up, down, push button functionality, as well as rotary encoder. Now, interestingly, on the SimuCube wireless version of this wheel, one of those stalks can also be used to change force feedback settings on the fly as well without having to Alt-Tab out of the game, which is a really cool option, although you don't get any kind of visual representation of what's going on the wheel itself. So it can be a little bit clunky to use, and that was something that we weren't super happy about when we checked it out on the SimuCube Taco wheel recently. So in a practical sense, I really do like any wheel that has two 7-way switches here. It allows for very easy menu navigation as well as navigating through things like black boxes within the actual simulation itself. Often sim racing titles don't allow you to map the same control for navigating through your black box as navigating through the menu, so that is made a lot easier by having two of them. Now, the two 7-way switches on this particular wheel do have nice anodized aluminium hats on them too, so they have that nice cool to the touch feel if you're not wearing gloves, and they have a really nice solid detent in each position as well. So it's a nice clearly defined click as you rotate through each individual position. Definitely no complaints when it comes to the quality there. So then looking up the top of the wheel, we have two rotary encoders with push button functionality. So again, a nice solid click and then nice clearly defined detents in each position as well. A little bit softer than what we have on a Cube Controls wheel. These are a little bit more snappy, I guess you could say, but clearly defined enough that you're not going to accidentally activate these with gloves on or anything like that. So they have a really nice, I guess, more dampened feel to them overall, and yeah, absolutely no complaints there either. Now, this is where we start to get into where we can do some really cool stuff with inputs. So you've got a little switch on the back of the SimuCube wireless version, and that allows you to switch between push button encoder and shift mode for each of these two rotary encoders. So what that means is in the standard mode, you've got a standard functioning rotary encoder with mappable push button functionality. If you switch it across to the shift mode, what that allows you to do is actually have a second function mapped to that rotary encoder. So without pushing the button, you might be controlling, say, ABS, for example, and then if you push the button down and rotate it, then that actually switches across to a different function entirely. So you could use the same knob for ABS and traction control, for example. So same function across both of these guys. And you can see here on the back, there's a switch for each of these buttons to independently control them. Importantly, on the USB version of this wheel, you don't have these mechanical switches. It's done through their software package. So moving down to the bottom of the wheel, I'm sure you guys have already spotted it. A very, very, very welcome addition to the V3 wheels is the addition of the thumb encoders down the bottom here. Now look, admittedly, I would prefer if they were in an upper position here. And again, I'll grab the Cube Controls wheel just for reference here. You can see if I'm driving, I take my thumb off, I can very, very quickly make those adjustments. In the lower position, you are gonna have to kind of rotate your hand around, which if you're mid-corner and you're kind of counter steering and doing things like that, it can make it a little bit more clunky. Now, because of the layout of the wheel, you can see it would be a lot more difficult to have that encoder positioned here just because of the physical design of the wheel. But, you know, at least they're there. That is a very big improvement. And we'll comment on the, I guess, the ergonomics and usability of that a little bit later on when we go driving as well. But the rotary encoders themselves here have a really nice feel to them once again. A nice kind of dampened feeling too. They're not too clunky, not too clicky. Clearly defined detents in each position once again though, so you're not going to push these by accident. And I would say for me, I don't use the term lightly, but I would say this is the perfect amount of resistance. I do find the Cube Controls wheels by comparison are a little bit stiff sometimes with gloves. Your hand can kind of tend to slip over it rather than activating it. You do kind of adjust to it and get used to it over time, but I would be lying if I didn't say I preferred the feeling of the ones that we have here. And as you can see on the Grid MPX wheel, we do actually have rotary encoders in the upper and lower position. So I wanted to just point that out quickly for you guys as well. And those have actually a pretty similar feeling to the ones that we have here. And then in addition to that, we have two 12 position switches down the bottom of the wheel here too. And those have a really, really nice action to them. It's it's almost got like a kind of springy effect to it. So when you rotate it in each position, it's a really, really positive click, but it's not too stiff. You feel like you're really connected to something. Sounds funny, but it is a really, really nice feeling switch there. So the advantage of a multi-position switch as opposed to a rotary encoder is that the sim racing title, provided that it is actually compatible with this function, actually knows what position the switch is in. So you can imagine with a rotary encoder, if the game doesn't actually know the physical position of that switch, all it knows is that it was pulsed in that direction. So position 1 on the switch may then end up being position 7 in the sim, and you can imagine it just kind of counts up from there. So you lose track of where you are, which means if you're trying to label individual positions on the wheel, it can get very confusing and very weird. Whereas with a multi-position switch, engine map number 1 is always going to be engine map 1 and so forth. So we've got 2 of those, but the functionality doesn't stop there either, because again, if we flip around on the back of the wheel, you can see there's 2 more switches here, and that allows us to switch between the 12 position mode or a rotary shift mode. So if we switch those into rotary shift mode, and again, this is individually addressable between the left and right. So you can choose to only do this on the left or the right. And again, on the USB version of the wheel, it's done through software rather than a mechanical switch. But what this allows you to do is set up 12 individually mappable functions for the thumb encoders on either side. So you can imagine if you go position 1, that may then be adjusting ABS. Position 2 might be traction control cut. Position 3 might be your standard traction control. Position 4 might be engine map, and so forth. So it gives you 12 individually addressable functions for that one encoder, and then you times that by 2 because you've got the same functionality on the left here. So you might want to have, say, just the right-hand side as a multi-position switch for your engine map, and then have the right-hand side for everything else. I don't think you're ever going to need more functionality in terms of inputs than what this wheel is offering, and it's really cool to see them kind of thinking outside the box there and doing something a little bit different with the functionality of these multi-position switches. So yeah, definitely think that that's a really cool function. So then if we flip the wheel around, you can see we've got 2 magnetic paddle shifters here, and Ascher Racing paddle shifters are my favorite feeling shifters out of every single wheel that I've tried in the past. So they've got a really nice positive click to them, really kind of snappy feel. It is metal to metal contact, so they are a little bit on the loud side. Unfortunately, they don't include any little rubber dampers like we do see on some other wheels these days. But one thing that they do include, which I think is really cool, is a selection of different neodymium magnets, which you can actually swap out. And that allows you to adjust the mechanical resistance of these paddles between 260 grams and 800 grams. And yeah, that allows you to basically fine tune the shifter feel to whatever is going to suit your personal preference, which I think is really cool. Now, unfortunately, in terms of mechanical adjustment, you don't really have anything here for the throw, so you can't adjust the shifters in or out in their position. You also can't adjust the paddle position in and out. But I think, look, with the layout of the wheel and it being the shape that it is, those are in a pretty good position. I've got, relatively small hands, but yeah, I can't really see that being a problem for anybody. It is a full aluminium design here as well. So we do see carbon fiber paddles on a lot of other wheels, but you can see in fact here, the entire construction of this wheel is all milled or billet aluminium right through to the cages and the shifter arms themselves. So really, really high quality stuff here. And that continues through to the analog paddles on the bottom here, which can be configured as a dual stage clutch or a bite point clutch. And we'll show you how that works a little bit later on, or you can map it to individual axes as well. They've got a really nice long stroke here, which allows for a lot of control. So particularly if you're somebody that can't use pedals and you are relying on these for a throttle and a brake, I think this is going to suit you really well, and definitely a lot better than many of the other wheels that have that functionality. And these are using contactless Hall effect sensors rather than rotary potentiometers as well, in case you were wondering. Now you can actually see there, we can move those paddles in a little bit with the second holes there if you wish to do so. But again, all aluminium construction there, no flex in those paddles whatsoever. I mean, obviously you're never going to be absolutely reefing on this and pulling it as hard as you can, but at normal kind of tension levels, or maybe a little bit over what you would expect to actually put through that, there's no flex there at all. And same deal for the shifters as well. Really, really, really solid feeling overall. So as I referenced earlier, full CNC machined aluminium construction pretty much throughout the entire wheel. In fact, the only plastic bits that you'll find anywhere on this wheel are just the little Bluetooth antenna here if you get the SimuCube version, and the hats on the actual switches themselves. Everything else here is all anodized aluminium, which is really, really nice to the touch. And that aluminium, of course, also extends through to the faceplate here, which you can see has a really nice brushed aluminium finish. So it has a really nice kind of glossy shiny look to it that really kind of stands out on your rig, at least in my opinion. But I really like the fact that they've used a nice thick piece of 5mm thick aluminium here. It just does seem to give it that little bit more rigidity when compared to a piece of carbon fiber of around about the same kind of thickness. So I do think that that's a clever design choice. It is a unibody kind of design here as well. So this piece of aluminium extends right throughout the grips. The grips are molded to the aluminium itself, so unfortunately they aren't replaceable. We do see that as a bit of a theme across most sim racing wheels, although it is worth noting that the VRS wheels you can actually replace the grips on. So we'll look at that when we get into that review. But on the subject of the grips, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately in a subjective way because this is something that I personally am not a huge fan of, they are using that sticky kind of feeling rubber for the grips here. Now, unfortunately, what that means is that it does feel a little bit tacky and gooey under your hands. In the time that we've been handling this, just looking at it on the table, you can see how it's kind of picked up this dusty kind of look. That is in fact just dead skin cells that it's picked up off my hands and dirt and debris. It just sticks to it like a magnet, and it is quite difficult to clean as well. Obviously, you don't want to be using solvents and things like that on the grips because you can damage them. Now, they have really good durability in terms of wear and tear, and they've got a good amount of squish to them, but I mean, again, it is a very subjective thing, but I just prefer the feeling of these grips that we have on the Cube Controls F Pro, for example, which have a similar kind of feel to them in terms of the squishiness, but they just have that smoother finish and they just don't pick up all that dirt and debris like what we have on the Ascher wheel. But I do have to say that the ergonomic design of the grips and how they actually feel in the hands is very, very good. So if we jump across to the dash as well, we haven't talked about this guy very much yet. We'll talk about this in more detail when we get up and running on the sim later on. But you can see again, very, very high quality in terms of materials used. It's a completely CNC machined aluminium enclosure front and back. We've got an array of 21 LEDs, and those are all individually bored as well, which means that you're not going to get any bleed between the LEDs, which is often the case on a lot of other dashes that we have looked at over the years, although more high-end stuff like what we're looking at this price point does tend to have that design feature as well. I do like the fact that they've got an on-off switch here, and it also does come with two mounts, which are both constructed of 4mm thick carbon fiber, so nice and solid. One of those is compatible with your Fanatec bases, so DD1, DD2, and I believe also the CSL DD and GT DD Pro, so two mounting holes there, and then that bolts onto the back like so, and you can adjust up and down with the hardware that they include in the box, which is a nice touch. They also do include some nice anodized aluminium spacers and extended bolts there for mounting to various different bases too. So I really do like the fact that they include all that kind of hardware. That's another thing that I've always liked about Ascher Racing is they kind of think about all the various different usage cases that might exist and try to include as much hardware as they can to make it as easy as possible, so you don't have to run to the hardware store when you've just unboxed your brand new shiny piece of gear. So that's nice. There is also a mount here as well for your standard SimiCube, Midge, SimMagic, and so forth bases as well. So that should have you covered for pretty much everything. The 4-inch variant has a resolution of 800 by 480, whereas the 5-inch, like what we see here, has a resolution of 854 by 480. It is a resistive touchscreen as well, and it's using a standard Vocore display panel, which makes it compatible with SimHub, Z1 dashboard, Joel Real Timing, and all the usual suspects, as is the case with most dashboards and integrated dashes these days. But we'll look at that in more detail up on the sim and talk about contrast ratio, colors, and all those things a little bit later on. So a couple more quick things to cover before we jump into the sim. Firstly, battery life. So unlike the F28 SC, which was a non-rechargeable battery which you had to replace, and admittedly I've never actually had to replace the battery in this, although I haven't used this wheel for quite some time, so it's probably not really a fair comparison. But this actually comes with a lithium polymer rechargeable battery internally, and it's charged through the USB port that you see just down here with the included USB-C cable. So not intended to be plugged in while you're driving. You can see it's just a standard USB-C connection. There's no provision there for any extra strength or strain relief or anything like that. It's not a coiled cable like what you get with the USB version of the wheel, but you get 800 hours of lifetime out of a single charge on the battery. Even at the point where the battery warning light comes on, you should still have about 33 hours worth of usage. So very, very unlikely that you're going to find yourself in a pickle with it being a battery operated wheel. I know that is a thing that concerns a lot of people. I've just honestly never, ever found it to be a problem with any of the wireless wheels that I've used over the years on my SimiCube 2 Ultimate. So I just really don't think it's anything to worry about at all. So yeah, given that that's the case, even if you do completely flatten the battery, which you shouldn't ever do because you can actually damage the battery in doing so, shouldn't ever be a scenario where you wouldn't have enough charge in there to at least get through one race before plugging it in and charging it up anyway. And it's extremely unlikely that it's going to go flat on you mid-race or anything crazy like that. So just lastly, I also need to talk about the stickers that they include too, because they do include a nice selection of very, very, very nice high quality stickers. They got a kind of matte finish to them. I'm not sure exactly what the printing process is, so I'm not going to pretend that I do, but we've got black ones here as well as white ones, so you can overlay those on the button faces themselves. And then we also have a nice big assortment of rotary encoder stickers here too. So I'll try to get all of these abbreviations right. We've got brake balance, traction control, ABS or anti-lock braking system, dash, menu, anti-roll bar, differential, black box, display, recup, which I think is recuperation, or like the ARS deployment mode or regenerative mode. I think that's what it is, but I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments if I've got that wrong. Volume, and then we've also got a blank one here as well, which you can label how you want, and then obviously a selection of different colors for each of those individual ones. So I can't think of too many different things that you would want in addition to that. And again, nice that they include all of those stickers. But anyway, I think that's pretty much everything that we need to cover. Quickly in terms of mounting as well, as I mentioned earlier, 70mm stud pattern. Just one thing to be aware of here, they do have some adapter plates available on their website if you do need to adapt these to other quick releases, but most quick releases these days are a 70mm stud pattern anyway. Just be aware that these are threaded holes, so it's going to be most convenient to bolt through some holes on your quick release into the threaded holes on this side. If you do need to bolt through from the other side, you're just going to need to make sure that you use some captive screws just so you don't end up with any thread binding. And you can just remove the casing by undoing the bolts on the front of the wheel. The back end comes off very easily. You just put some captive screws through and you can mount through to your quick release from either side. Just one other thing to be aware of there as well is if you do have a really shallow quick release, you may find that you need to have some sort of a spacer in there as well. But for me and my zero play quick release that I run on my SimuCube 2 Ultimate, and for the standard SimuCube SQR quick release, that's not a problem. Okay, so we've got the wheel and dash up and running on the rig now. I just wanted to quickly run you through the software setup side of things, just so you have an idea and a sense of what you're going to be up against if you do decide to buy one of these products. So starting with the wheel, remembering again that this is the SimuCube version of the wheel. If you're wanting to know how the USB version works, check out our review that we did of the F64 V3 wheel. That shows the software. It's pretty much the same idea. It's all very, very simple in terms of how it's all calibrated. The SimuCube version is a little bit more complicated just because you're having to work with analog inputs to calibrate things, and you know it's pretty straightforward once you get your head around it, but there's a little bit of detail in here. So the first step is going to be to actually get your wheel connected to the SimuCube. It's exactly the same process as any other SimuCube wireless wheel if you've done it before. So basically all you're doing is you're just bringing up the wireless profile here. You're going to switch on the wheel and you'll see one of the LEDs blinking. You've only got a couple of seconds to pair it before it goes out of pairing mode on the wheel. So you're going to load it up. You'll see the wheel pop up here immediately as a connectable device. You're just going to click on connect selected device and it will go beep beep, and then you're all good to go. So that's all that's required in terms of connecting the wheel to the base. The only complexity is then just setting up the analog paddles. And if we go back to the main screen now, you can see it's actually showing a version of the wheel that's connected to. Now you can see here, I do actually have my paddles and everything all configured. That is all good to go. I'm just going to quickly run you through the calibration of the analog paddles and also how we set the bite point clutch as well, because that's all done through this software. So we're going to go to the settings panel. We're going to go to configure analog inputs, and you'll see up the top here, we've got an option for wireless wheel. We're going to click on that. And if you want to use a bite point clutch, you're going to set one of these as your master and one as the slave. You'll alternate these depending on which hand you want to be which. So at the moment, my master is my left hand, my slave is my right hand. And you'll notice that these look like they're running kind of inverted. What it's doing is it's actually comparing the values between the two to give you the end result. And you'll see when we get into iRacing in just a second how this actually works. So what you want to do here is set a minimum and maximum dead zone. You want that to be within a couple of % of the raw value here. So you can see at the moment when my paddle is completely released, I'm getting a raw value of 6.4. So you want to have the dead zone just slightly above that so that you're not accidentally getting a reading if you just touch it or if the calibration slips a tiny bit. And likewise with the top as well, we look at the raw value when we've got the paddle pulled all the way in, and then set the dead zone high to be a couple of % lower than that. So you can see 93 is the raw value. I've set it to 89 just to make absolutely sure that I do get 100% engagement. We're going to set up the slave exactly the same way on the right hand side, or swap them around if you want to. And then we go back to the SimuCube 2 tab and we configure the clutch as the option wheel clutch here. That's going to tell it to look at that analog input to be the clutch. Now you will notice there's a little bit of lag here in the input. That is just the animation inside the SimuCube software. When we get into iRacing, you'll see that it's absolutely fine. Now, if you don't want to use bite point clutch, what you can do is set one of these to be a throttle or a brake or a normal analog clutch, or just not configured if you don't want to use it at all. Now there is an option for bite point here as well. I'm assuming that that must be for a different type of wheel, because we definitely want to set this guy to master and slave as per the instructions. So if I now want to adjust my bite point, I can do that completely from the wheel. So the way we do that is we hold down the right hand stick, hold it down for a second. You'll see we get the orange light there on the right hand side. That means we're in adjustment mode. And now when we rotate the button on the right, that is going to increase in 0.1% increments, and on the left in 1% increments. So if I pull in my clutch now, and you'll notice there on the dash as well, we do actually get a reading if we're running the Ascher Racing dash, which is quite cool. So you can see there on the screen, we've got 100% clutch engagement. If we then release my left hand, you'll see that's dropping down to 76.9 on that screen, or 76.8 as it's reading on the dash. So if I go up here, you can see I can increase it 77, 77.1, 77.2, so forth. And then if we want to go in 1% increments, we can just drop it like that. So say I want 72%, I would set it like that. And now, when I pull my clutch in, I'm getting 100% engagement. When I want to get the car underway, I'll release my first hand. That's going to get me to the point where the clutch is just biting. I'm starting to get a little bit of traction, and then I can slowly release the second hand to get all the way underway. So it's as simple as that for setting up the bite point. Remembering again, if you do want to swap hands, all you need to do is just set the opposite for master and slave, and you are good to go. So that is the calibration and setup of the wheel. Pretty straightforward. You can see the software is a little bit clunky. That's not Ascher Racing's fault, of course. That's just SimuCube dealing with analog inputs and being limited, because obviously it has to be compatible with as many different devices as possible. So if you're using the Ascher Racing software with the USB version of the wheel, it is a lot more straightforward to set that up. Now we're going to minimize the SimuCube software and go into SimHub now. SimHub is the software that they recommend for operating the dash, simply because it's compatible with the LEDs and with the dash itself. If you do want to run other third-party apps like Joel Real Timing or Z1 Dashboard, for example, you can run those on the display and have them operate as well. So that's all completely up to you. But just to get you started here again, what we're going to do is we're going to click on Add New Device. We're going to select the Ascher Racing 4 or 5-inch dashboard. So it's great now that SimHub does have a lot of profiles cooked in for these types of things. And that's just going to load up our default profile here. And you can see by default here, it's got this kind of animation that runs through on the LEDs, which is quite cool. Now, the first thing I noticed is just how bright the LEDs are on this dash. So that is only 40% brightness, believe it or not. If I go to 100%, I've said of other dashes and wheels that they're thermonuclear bright, but that is like the sun. That is, that's way too bright for me. But the idea is that you can use it as a shift light and kind of see it in your peripheral vision without actually having to look at the dash to see what's going on. So it's cool that it goes that bright. I'm sure there'll be some people out there that love it, but for me, it's definitely way, way, way more bright than I would ever need. So being SimHub, you can completely configure this to your own personal taste. You can get in there and change pretty much everything about this, but by default, the profile works really well. You've got your standard controls for configuring all the LEDs, so flag lights, telemetry, all the things that you would expect and all the things that we've covered a million times by now in various different wheel and dash reviews. But just to give you a quick idea here, if I open up some test data, I'm not sure RPM is going to work from here, but it will work when we get into iRacing. But if we go, say, DRS active, you can see we've got a green light there to let us know that DRS is running. DRS enabled as well, so that will pop up. Traction control kicking in, ABS kicking in. And then we can also have flag LEDs for black flag, white flag, green flag, and so forth as well. You can also set up spotters too. So this is really cool, particularly with the bright LEDs. So if you've got a car on your left, it'll blink like that. If you've got a car on your right, it'll blink like that to give you a visual representation, again, in your peripheral vision, so you're not having to take your eyes off the road, which is really cool. And then, of course, you can run any dash you want through SimHub as well, so the sky's really the limit there. Ascher Racing do have a really nice looking dash here, which is pre-configured in this profile. You can also install that separately if you wish to do so. And then being a touchscreen as well, you can also tab through various different displays if you wish to do so. That's also very powerful if you're running something like Z1 Dashboard to go through different menus and configure things and whatnot. But there's so many things you can do there. The video would be an hour and a half long if we went into every single thing. I think you get the idea. In terms of resolution, really nice and crisp. It isn't the highest resolution in the world if you compare to something like a smartphone, for example, but more than adequate for what we're doing here. And even just the small text there, I can read absolutely fine. So no issues running leaderboards or anything like that. So driving experience with the dash and wheel. Now I've put probably about 6 or 7 hours of driving into these now over the last couple of days and really been enjoying the experience. I think the 285mm diameter in particular is absolutely perfect for me for everything basically between Formula style and GT3, GT4 driving. So pretty much anything with a wheel this shape, this diameter seems to be absolutely spot on for me. I just feel I've got just the right amount of control. It's not dampening the inputs too much like what you get with a larger diameter, and I'm not finding that it's too twitchy and too kind of all over the place like I find with smaller diameter wheels. Now obviously everybody's going to be different there. The strength of the wheelbase that you're running will be a factor there too. I'm running a SimuCube 2 Ultimate here at around about 12 to 14, maybe 15 Newton meters at absolute peak in some of the cars that I was driving. And yeah, this is absolutely ideal for me, at least in that scenario. Weight-wise as well, I've always been a fan of the weight of the Ascher Racing wheels. They've really nailed the balance between, you know, feeling solid and purposeful in your hand, but not being too heavy to the point where it just feels awkward to drive with. And the balance of this wheel is really great as well. It feels almost like it's floating in space, rotating around the central axis there. It's just, yeah, they've just done a really good job, and they've really nailed all of those important aspects when it comes to the actual driving experience with a wheel. So the only two complaints that I have with the wheel is just that I don't like this sticky material that they use for the hand grips. Now, admittedly, it does tend to grip your hands a little bit better than the smoother surfaces do if you're not wearing gloves. I did do some back-to-back driving with the F Pro wheel just to sort of try and, you know, do some comparison directly. And yeah, when I'm in the heat of the race and my hands are sweating a little bit, this one does have a little bit more grip, but it just starts to feel tacky and gross under my hand. And I just don't like the feeling of this material. It does pick up that dirt and debris, dead skin cells off your hands and whatnot as well. So if that's a problem for you, you know, you may not like the grips on this. Unfortunately, they aren't interchangeable on this particular wheel like they are with some other wheels. But if you're driving with gloves on, which I would imagine most people that are buying a wheel of this kind of price point will likely be doing, it's not an issue at all. But there's no issues at all with, you know, rubbing or sharp edges, anything like that. Very comfortable in terms of ergonomics. Otherwise, the only other thing, and you may disagree with me here, but I would much prefer to have thumb encoders either in the position up here or here, like what we have with the Cube Controls CSX3, for example. So you can see that's really nice and easy to operate while you're driving if you're mid-corner without having to take your eyes off the road. Whereas on the Ascher Racing wheel, you do kind of have to roll your hand around. You can also just kind of roll your thumb down and operate it with your pinky as well. And again, your hand shape will determine how difficult or how easy this is to do. But for me, I just find it a little bit awkward, and I did find that until I got used to it, I was having to take my eyes off the road to kind of feel where it was. And if I was mid-corner trying to make an adjustment, I just did find it a little bit more awkward to do than I would if the encoders were in those other positions. But again, it's a subjective thing. You may disagree with me. Let me know in the comments what you think about that. Now, as has always been the case with every Ascher wheel that I've tested, the shifters feel absolutely fantastic as well. Remembering again that you do have those included different magnets so you can change the amount of resistance. The default setting is absolutely spot on for me, and I really love it's so hard to put my finger on exactly what it is about these shifters, but they've just got such a good click to them. It almost feels like it's assisted in some way. When you activate the shift, it almost like it just kind of pushes itself into position. It's hard to describe, but they've just got an absolutely fantastic feel. A lot of wheels around this price point do feel absolutely fantastic, but every time I go back to using an Ascher wheel, there's just something about it in those shifts that I really love. It doesn't have as much adjustment available as a lot of other shifters do at this price point. Once again, you can't adjust the angle of the shifters, so if that's important to you, then that's maybe a deal breaker, but I don't think that that's going to be an issue for you. I think they're close enough that even if you've got really tiny hands, you're going to be able to operate them, and even if you've got big hands, they're far enough away that I don't think it's going to be an issue. The analog paddles have an absolutely fantastic feel to them as well, really smooth in operation, and as you saw earlier, they've got a really long throw to them as well. So if you are somebody that wants to use the paddles as a throttle and a brake, I think that this wheel is going to be ideal for that as well. So a couple of notes on the software side of things as well, remembering that there is a USB version of this wheel available too, which uses their own software. So basically it'll work with any wheelbase. This particular one is only compatible with SimuCube 2 wheelbases or SimuCube 1 if you've got the the upgraded Bluetooth module. I would like to see a PC compatible Bluetooth version of the wheel because I do really like driving untethered, but obviously that's going to be a limitation with this wheel because if you don't have a semi-cube wheelbase, then you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to go with the tethered USB version. The much cheaper Cube Controls F-Core that we reviewed just a couple of weeks ago does have that functionality, and that does come in at a much cheaper price point than this wheel is. Admittedly, the quality isn't as good on that wheel as it is here, but we are starting to see that functionality. The Leox XF1 that we reviewed the other day as well, again, much cheaper than this wheel, and it also does have an integrated dash that has that functionality too. So I would like to see, maybe they could integrate that into the USB version so you have that option like what we see with those other wheels. So yeah, the SimiCube software that you need to use to get this up and running is a little bit daunting at first. It did take me sort of 10 minutes or so to get my head around everything to get those analog paddles up and running and calibrated correctly and operating with a clutch bite point. Everything else was extremely straightforward though. All the other buttons and everything were all just completely plug and play and no issues there whatsoever. Now, while we're on the subject of software, one thing that I was very, very happy about was just how easy the dash was to get up and running. We haven't talked about that much yet. We're about to get into it. But yeah, all I needed to do was just upgrade to the latest version of SimHub, go add device, select the profile for this particular dash, and everything just worked straight away. There was no stuffing around, there was no hassle, nothing whatsoever. Now that certainly can't be said for my experience with other dashes and other wheels with integrated dashes that we've tested in the past. There has been instances where it's taken me literal days to get things working properly. And even then you kind of have to set up and hack profiles to get them working with individual cars. Whereas with this, yeah, the out of the box experience was really, really great. Now that may have improved on some of those other products given the advances that we've seen in SimHub. So don't take my word for it that this is easier to use than every other dash that we've tested. But yeah, definitely the experience was absolutely fantastic here. So yeah, from a software side there, if you are using SimHub, you're not going to have any issues there. If you're wanting to run it with Z1 dashboard or Joel real timings, well, pretty straightforward. Remembering again that it's just a standard Vocore touchscreen internally, so anything that's compatible with that is going to work with at least the dash here. And then of course the LEDs will depend on the software that you're running, but you can always run SimHub just to control the LEDs and use something else for the display if you want to. So there's plenty of options with regards to that as well. With regards to dashes as well, remembering that you can customize this fully. You can use any dash that you want inside SimHub. So you really, the sky's the limit there in terms of creativity, but I was actually really happy with the integrated Ascher dash. It shows you all the information that I found relevant when I was driving. You can also tab through by tapping on the screen as well to see things like leaderboards if you wish to do so. And it does also pop up on the screen as you'll see in this driving footage with adjustments that you make on the wheel as well. So if you're adjusting your ABS, your traction, your clutch, for example, those are all going to show up on the screen in real time. That would work with any other dash as well, provided that you're running a profile that has that functionality. So it's not really a selling point for this dash specifically, but the two do work really well together in unison. So we're going to get into using this as a combo in just a second, but also just wanted to mention that another thing that I really appreciated about the dash was the overall brightness, particularly these LEDs. I was only running them at 40 to 50%, and that was, you know, more than bright enough for me. At 100%, they are so bright that you're going to see them in your peripheral vision. And one of the things that I did test was doing away with using Crew Chief for an audio spotter and just relying on the flag LEDs on the side to know when there was a car alongside me. And I did probably about 8 or 9 online races in iRacing and didn't have a single incident with another car. I was kind of trying to be hyper focused on, you know, trying to drive as cleanly as possible and really relying on that. And yeah, it worked absolutely fine. So I'd say if you don't want to have that audio spotter and you're wanting to rely on a visual representation, then yeah, these are bright enough that you're going to see them in your peripheral vision without having to take your eyes off the road and, you know, consciously focus on the display to know whether there's cars around you, which obviously you're not going to be doing when you're trying to negotiate a racetrack. So are these two products individually worth the money? So we'll start with the dash. Look, I mean, the thing you've got to be aware of is that there are other dashes on the market which offer the same functionality as this, aren't as well presented as this is, but cost, you know, maybe a quarter of the price of something like this. So, you know, we've looked at 3D printed dashes in the past that have LED functionality. They don't look anywhere near as nice as this, but they still have a carbon fiber faceplate. And, you know, really it's going to come down to whether having something that's presented like this is, you know, worth paying 4 times as much for. And really that's a question that only you guys can answer. One thing that I will say with regards to the dash though, is for the price, I do find that Ascher Racing logo across the front a little obnoxious, but let me know in the comments what you guys think about that. So yeah, really the dash in terms of functionality, it's not really offering anything significantly more than something that's significantly cheaper to buy. So whether or not it's worth it is purely up to you. Now, with regards to the wheel, I mean, look, again, it's a tricky one. I mean, we reviewed the Cube Controls F-Core the other day, which does offer a lot of the same functionality. Now look, in terms of the driving experience between the two, I would much rather drive with the Ascher wheel, even though I do prefer the grip material that they have on the F-Core. Just the little things like the feeling of the rotary encoders in particular just feels a lot more cheap than it does on the Ascher wheel. The shifters in particular, I was pretty harsh on in our review, and remembering again that this is a lot cheaper than this wheel is, but I would much rather drive with the Ascher wheel than this wheel if given the choice. Again, whether or not the difference in price is worth it to you is purely going to come down to your own personal circumstance, but I would much sooner put this wheel on the rig than this one to drive with. I've got to be honest with you guys. So as another point of comparison, we also have the Cube Controls F Pro, which comes in at a much more similar price point and is much more evenly matched to this wheel in terms of the look and feel, the operation and whatnot. Now, there are a couple of things that I prefer about the Ascher wheel to this wheel. Again, I do prefer the feeling of the shifters on the Ascher wheel. Subjectively as well, I think that the Ascher wheel has a nicer feel in terms of the paddles. They're just a little bit stiffer on this wheel, which makes it a little bit more difficult to control the inputs for me, but you might actually prefer the stiffer spring resistance that you have on the F Pro. So really, again, it's a very subjective thing there. Look, this does have the advantage of things like backlit buttons. It does have the advantage of thumb encoders in the positions that I like them, but the thumb encoders on this don't feel as nice as the ones on the Ascher wheel. The buttons on the Cube Control wheel don't have the same kind of nice squishiness that we discussed earlier on in the video too. So I do prefer the feeling of the buttons on the Ascher wheel. Again, that's a subjective thing. We do have aluminium touch points on all of the encoders, same as what we have on the Ascher wheel. But again, the feeling of those is just that little bit nicer on the Ascher wheel. But yeah, I think when it comes down to it, for most people, it's going to come purely down to the aesthetics. So some people might prefer this design, others might prefer this. Obviously, having the configurable LED backlights is a big deal for some people. Personally, I kind of feel like I can take it or leave it. And I think given the choice between the two wheels, you guys have seen the F Pro on the rig a lot recently. I think I probably would run this wheel over this one. We'll see. Have a look at our race videos coming up and see which wheel we end up using. But yeah, it is tight between the two. The F Pro does have that nice smooth material, which I do prefer to drive with bare hands, but I'm never driving the sim rig with bare hands anyway. I'm always using gloves. So yeah, I think I will probably end up using this wheel on the rig more often than I use this one. But watch our upcoming race videos and we'll see what transpires. So then lastly, to wrap things up, I know another question that a lot of people are gonna have is it worth looking at a wheel and dash combination like this as opposed to something like a Cube Control CSX3 or a Gomez Formula Pro Elite? Now these obviously have integrated dashes. There are strengths and weaknesses of both of these wheels, and we're not gonna get into comparisons between them. You can see the full review of the Gomez wheel and the CSX3 right here on the channel. I'll drop some links down in the description below for you. Now, look, in terms of the driving experience overall, look, I mean, admittedly, I'm not spending a lot of time looking at a dash when I'm driving anyway. Now, our setup here is quite unique in that I'm able to have my screens low enough that without having a physical dash here, I can still see the virtual dash inside the sim. And that's what you guys are looking at if you watch our race videos, generally speaking. So, look, there are things that you can do with a dash, you know, displaying leaderboards, things like that, flag LEDs, which may not work on the dash in the sim, depending on what car you're driving, of course. Things like spotter LEDs, for example, aren't generally going to be operational on a virtual dash inside a sim. So from a functionality standpoint, there is definitely some things you can do with a standalone dash that you can't do on the virtual dash inside the sim. But yeah, for me, I don't find a lot of time actually looking at the dashboard itself. If I am looking at the dashboard, for me, again, I'm generally doing it when I'm driving down a long straight. So it doesn't really matter about the position of the dash. Now, the complaint that a lot of people have about wheels like this is that, you know, when you're driving around, you're adjusting your steering, you can't read what's on the screen anyway because it's moving around. So if you are the sort of person that struggles with that, or you think you might struggle with that, then yeah, I would say that having the dash in a fixed position is the better option. And yeah, I mean, when you look at a combination like this, it does come in at a similar kind of price point to a lot of these kind of wheels that we're looking at with integrated dashes. So yeah, I think it's gonna come down to a personal preference thing. But for me personally, look, I just like to run whatever the car has in real life. So if I'm driving a car that has an integrated dash on the steering wheel, I'll go with a wheel more like this or the CSX3. If I'm driving something that doesn't have a dash, then generally I'll just be using a wheel like this and then relying on the virtual dash on the screen. But in lieu of that, if you've got screens that sit too high to be able to see the dash, then yeah, I think that having a dedicated dash like this is a good option. Where I think I would land if I was being more budget conscious is probably save the money on a dash like this, go with one of those cheaper options that cost like a quarter of the price of something like this and still offer the same functionality functionality as we were discussing earlier, and then save that money towards a second wheel that has an integrated dash, and then you've got the best of both worlds. That's what I would do, but let us know in the comments down below what you guys think. But yeah, look, overall, I've really enjoyed the experience driving this wheel over the last couple of days. As I said, I've put about 6 or 7 hours of pure driving into this now, and I think this will become my wheel of choice for anything that uses this shaped wheel and doesn't have an integrated dash, at least for the next little while. Even though I really do wish it had the thumb encoders in those upper positions, the other aspects of the wheel that I enjoy enough to, I guess, outweigh that disadvantage and make me choose this wheel over others. So that's where I've landed with it. I do really wish that they offered the ability to customize the button colors. I know a lot of people don't like the whole rainbow thing that's going on here. I would prefer personally if we maybe just had red and black buttons, or maybe yellow and black, something like that. So, you know, when we look at competitor products, particularly the likes of Gomez, for example, you do have the option to completely customize the button layout or choose between a couple of different preset options. That isn't an option with Ascher Racing at the moment, but I know they are going to be coming out with a bunch of other wheels relatively soon as well. You guys that were at the ADAC conference last year would have seen some of those, I believe. So yeah, really excited to see what they can bring to the table in terms of some other wheel styles that retain this kind of build quality and functionality. So yeah, for what it is, I think it does an absolutely awesome job. And if you're lucky enough to be in a position to buy one of these, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. So really hope that today's video has helped you out. If it has, leave a thumbs up. If you do want to pick up any of the gear that you've seen in today's video, there are some links down in the description, which are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you. So we really appreciate your support there. But above all, thanks for watching, guys, and we will see you again very soon. Bye.